Hey guys, welcome back to Analyzing Horror. My name's Lauren, and today we'll be talking about the eerie psychological horror, The Babadook. So Amelia, who lost her husband in a car crash on the way to giving birth to their only son, Samuel, is struggling to cope with her grief as well as her fate as being a single mother. And Samuel's fear of monsters and his violent reactions to overcome them doesn't help either, which causes family and friends to distance themselves from them. One night, Samuel asks for a bedtime story and hands over a strange and mysterious children's pop-up book titled The Babadook, which depicts an unsettling, sinister presence invading their home. After seeing strange things around the house, Amelia attempts to destroy the book and throw it out, only for it to show up fully mended on their doorstep the next day. She continues to see things as well as the Babadook monster itself, and she's forced to ask herself, is this disturbing entity actually real? And is it truly lurking in the dark corners of their home? So I really like this movie, and I think one of the reasons is because of my journey with it. I remember the first time that I watched it, and I just didn't get it. Like, I didn't like the ending, I didn't really understand it, and so I just kind of like tossed it aside as like a movie I wasn't a fan of. This was also at the time when I was first getting used to what some call elevated horror, just horror movies that have like layers and different messages and symbolism in them. So like I said, at first I just tossed it aside as a movie that I just wasn't interested in, but I kept revisiting it and I started like really looking into like the different layers and the messages and the symbolism of the movie. And I actually really like it now, as well as just the Babadook monster itself looking great. But I just think that it's a really great movie. It's very unsettling. And it's also one of those movies that kind of just sits with you for days. And I really love when a horror movie does that. Yeah, it's become one of my favorite psychological horror movies, and I really like it. So fair warning, I'm going to be talking about the storyline and some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, make sure to pause, go watch the movie, and then come back afterwards. All right, let's get into my thoughts on the Babadook. I'd like to start off by talking about performances and my two favorite characters. So first off, I thought Essie Davis was outstanding as Amelia. Wow, did she give an incredible performance. I was really intrigued with the complexity of her character, what with her grief, as well as struggling to be a single parent, as well as trying to control Samuel just in general, as well as her eventual run-in with the Babadook and how that just completely changes her overall personality. Also, I think those last 30 to 40 minutes of the movie where Amelia is possessed by the Babadook is where her performance absolutely shines. She was so sinister and disturbing, and my god, some of that dialogue. She just blows me away with every rewatch, and I just think she does such a great job. I also thought Noah Wiseman did a good job as Samuel. I thought he gave a great child performance, although I struggled to say that I like his character. But I thought he played him really well. While Samuel was super annoying at times, I also felt sympathy for him. I think a lot of us can understand how hard it is growing up being labeled weird or an outcast amongst your peers. So I definitely understand how hard that must be for him. Not to mention also his home life. Also, without question, my favorite scene in this entire movie is when he's throwing a fit in the back seat and Amelia just pulls the car over, parks, turns around, and yells at him, "Why can't you just be normal?" And he just replies, "Ah!" Best scene ever. That scene is just absolute chaos, and it makes me laugh every time I watch this movie. Okay, let's move on to the storyline and some of my favorite scenes. So first off, I found the layers and the symbolism of the story to be very interesting. And like I mentioned earlier, it's one of the reasons why I really like this movie. I really like how early on you get multiple scenes of Amelia struggling with her grief of the loss of her husband, while also struggling to still be a mother and an employee. I also really like how the movie quickly establishes how difficult and, dare I say, weird Samuel is, and how that puts even further strain on this single mother. He often gets in trouble at school, as well as just basic day-to-day life with him. I just really felt for her in all of those scenes where she like tries to tell him not to do something, then he does it anyway. Also when he's constantly yelling at her for attention while she's trying to do something. Not to mention all the times that she tries to keep it together for Samuel, for her sister, or even just at work. Like, you can just tell from the very beginning that Amelia is an already very beaten down character, and I just really like how the movie quickly established that. I also really like how her feelings are presented in this movie. Like, you can just tell that she still carries her grief around with her every day, as well as just the basic exhaustion, stress, and difficulties of being a mother. Plus, her complication was Samuel's birthday. Since she lost her husband in that car crash on the way to give birth, so Samuel's birthday is also the day that he passed away. And while you can tell that she loves her son, you can also tell that he reminds her of that night, and it's just eating her up inside. I also really love how these feelings are rarely expressed verbally, but more through facial expressions, and you could just feel it through the screen. I just really love when movies do that, where feelings and emotions come through without little or no dialogue. And you can just tell that she's exhausted and stressed and everything else without her needing to speak in some scenes. So after the movie gives us about 30 minutes with Amelia and Samuel to understand their characters as well as their plights, one night Samuel picks out a book that he hadn't realized that they owned titled The Babadook and requests it for his bedtime story. And I just absolutely love this first read scene because it's really creepy, but also the book looks gorgeous. I just absolutely love the look of the book itself and all of the pop-ups, illustrations, and animations. They were beautiful, but also so eerie and unsettling. And in addition to the illustrations, all of the wording was really creepy too. If it's in a word or it's in a look, you cannot get rid of the Babadook. I just really love the wording because it's like childlike and very sing-songy, but it's so sinister. Also, the Babadook himself was so creepy, both in the book and also the alive version. I just love him so much. He's one of my favorite creature designs in general, but especially in psychological horror. Like, he's just so freaking unsettling. I just really love his humanoid features as well as just the way he moves. Like, he can float really slow and then also crawl really fast on the ceiling, like, ah! And oh my god, all of the noises that he makes. His absolutely hair-raising Babadook, Dook, Dook. Those scenes that he does that just creeps the ever-living hell out of me. I also thought it was really cool that the live version of the Babadook was all live action, like there was no CGI, and I just really appreciated that. I mean, of course, it makes him feel even more real, so it's all the more unsettling. I just really love how creative they got with his creature design, and he's just one of my favorites. Also, I already mentioned this scene before, but I just had to reiterate how much I loved that scene where Samuel is freaking out in the back of the car. Again, I just love how Amelia just like whips the car over, parks, and then turns around and just goes, "Why can't you just be normal?" And then his just banshee cry, ah! Like, up until this point, he's been nothing but trouble. So I just feel so bad for Amelia. Like, the audacity of this kid, I swear. Another scene I really love is when Amelia starts to suspect that the book is the cause for all of the strange events that have been happening in the house. So she tries to hide the book, but it ends up back out in the open again. Genuinely disturbed by this, as well as all of the new additions to the book that she sees, she starts to rip it up and then throw it away. But the next day she finds it fully mended sitting on her doorstep. I just really like that scene because it's so unsettling and eerie and incredibly ominous. Speaking of that scene, I thought the score added so much more unease to it, as well as the entire movie as a whole. Like, the score was so haunting with all of the creepy melodies as well as the sound effects. And those sound effects, like, oh my god, I just really loved all of the noises that the Babadook make, like all of like the animalistic roars and growls, as well as the sound of cicadas whenever he appears. Like, the Babadook looks creepy, he moves creepy, and now all of these sound effects just make him all the more unsettling and genuinely disturbing. In addition, this movie had beautiful cinematography. There were a couple of rapid time passing, fast forward shots that I really, really liked, as well as those scenes where Amelia is off in dreamland and then she slowly floats back onto her bed. I thought those were really captivating. We also get a couple of really cool Babadook point of view shots, especially this one scene where he flies through the house. I also really love how the movie plays with darkness. Like, there are some scenes where a bit of darkness can be seen off in the corner, and that gives the impression that the Babadook is just sitting there lingering and waiting to get closer and closer. Let me in! And I just really love when a horror movie's score and cinematography can further add that sense of unease in the story. And then we get that whole section of the movie where Amelia is first possessed by the Babadook. What a tense and terrifying situation. Like that scene where the Babadook is climbing on the ceiling above Amelia, like, oh my god! I just like how she's hiding under the covers, like, no, 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 no. But honestly, I don't know what I would do if I were in her situation. Like, that's just such a creepy and disturbing sensation. Knowing that you're being watched while under the covers in bed, like, oh. And then that scene where he kind of like falls into her and she first becomes possessed. Like, that entire scene is just so unsettling. And from there, she starts to snap and yell at Samuel. Like, there's this scene where she's laying in bed and Samuel quietly walks into the room and he's like, "Mommy, I'm hungry." And then she snaps back with, "All you do is talk, talk, talk. Don't you ever stop." Sorry, I didn't mean to yell, but I love how she like yells stop at the end. Like, such sharp words to a tiny little kid. Like, oh my god. And then poor little Samuel is like, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm just really hungry and there's nothing in the fridge." And Amelia whips around towards him and yells, "If you're so hungry, why don't you go and eat shit?" Jesus. that poor kid. She's also constantly rubbing her jaw and angrily staring off into space. And there's even one night where she wakes up from Samuel screaming her name and she's standing over him with a knife. Like, my God. And this also just makes her unravel even faster because she thinks that something's wrong with her. And she's also seeing hallucinations of the Babadook as well. And then one night the Babadook disguises himself as the husband and he tries to convince Amelia to bring me the boy. And when she refuses, the Babadook falls into her a second time. And you can just tell from her dilated pupils as well as the Babadook's animalistic roars that she's become fully possessed at this point. I really love this section of the movie, mostly because we get a bunch of Babadook scenes, but there's also this one where he kind of floats out of the darkness, and you can't see my hands, but he kind of like juts his fingers out at one point. It's so creepy, and I love that shot, and that entire section of the movie is just very Babadook heavy, and I love it so much. And then we get the super tense last 30 minutes of the movie where Amelia is fully possessed by the Babadook and begins to attack her family. And she starts this horrifying night by killing the family doggy. Oh, that scene breaks my heart, but with any movie that has an animal death, I have to just constantly tell myself, it's just a movie, it's not real. It's just a movie, it's not real. Like in reality, that doggy actor probably got lots of treats and petses for doing such a good job. So whenever there are scenes like that in horror movies, I just have to remind myself of that and that it's not real. That's the only way I can get through those scenes. And then she starts after Samuel and then animalistically kicks his bedroom door down, and then she floats over to him and the poor thing pees himself. But I don't blame him. She's yelling and roaring and talking in this deep hoarse Babadook voice. And oh my God, is Essie's performance in this section of the movie so incredible. Like I said earlier, it's where she absolutely shines. The way she depicts possessed Amelia is genuinely terrifying and disturbing. And some of the dialogue that she spits at Samuel, like Jesus. Like that part where she angrily says that she can't stop thinking about how she wished that he was the one that died in that car crash instead of her husband. Like, holy shit. Like, my jaw drops every time I watch that scene. Oh my God. Like, just everything she says to Samuel in that scene, the Babadook version of herself is so hateful. But I also really love how Samuel has been kind of prepping for this the entire time. He's got like this slingshot backpack thing and it fires a ball at Amelia and it distracts her long enough for him to be able to run down to the basement. And she follows, but Samuel also had a tripwire set up. So she falls and knocks herself unconscious. And while she's unconscious, Samuel ties her to the ground just so that she can't hurt him, and then begins to beg his mother to push the Babadook out. And I really love this scene because at first Babadook Mama is able to wrestle herself free and she starts strangling Samuel. But then Samuel just starts stroking his mother's face very softly and it makes her wail and like toss him to the side. And again, Essie's performance in this section of the movie as well is just so incredible. And then we get this really cool yet creepy exorcism scene where Amelia vomits up a bunch of putrid, inky black stuff and she was able to push the Babadook out and Samuel has his mummy again. But of course that's not the end of it because the Babadook is no longer in Amelia, but he's still in the house. And then we get this really cool final battle where the Babadook drags Samuel up the stairs, but Amelia grabs him just in time. And at first it seems like the Babadook is gonna win because Amelia is just crumbling in front of him. But then she starts to say things like, "You're nothing. You can't control me." And the Babadook is animalistically shrieking and roaring, and Amelia starts to yell back at it. She yells that he's trespassing in her home, and he begins to shriek and roar even louder. And then she just screams at him, "If you touch my child again, I'll fucking kill you!" And apparently the Babadook wanted to know if she was bluffing or not because he starts to pull Samuel towards him again. But once again, she grabs him just in time, and then she just roars at the Babadook. He's shrieking and wailing, and she's just bellowing at him, and there's just like this verbal fight. And I just have to say once again how much I loved Essie's performance in this section of the movie. So this final battle weakens the Babadook, and then we get this really cool point of view scene where the Babadook at first rushes up to Amelia, roars in her face, and then whips around the house and into the basement. And then we get that ending where Amelia and Samuel seem happy, and they also seem closer from the experience that they went through. And they're finally celebrating Samuel's birthday on the actual day for the first time. And they overall just seem very happy and content. However, we get this scene where Amelia feeds the Babadook worms in the basement. And I found that really intriguing because there's obviously a strong sense of symbolism in this ending. So at least from my perspective, the Babadook represents Amelia's grief, depression, and resentment, and how how now she has a much better control over her emotions, and she's allowing herself to, in a way, move on from her husband's passing. And again, the way I perceived the ending is that those feelings will never leave Amelia. They'll always be a part of her, but she's able to keep them under control at this point. But at the same time, those feelings and her loss will always be a part of her. And again, to me, feeding the Babadook at the very end seems to indicate that those feelings will never truly go away for her. But she's learned how to keep them under control and cope with it all, instead of letting it fully consume her. And you can tell at the very end that she seems much happier and healthier from learning all of this. Although I do have to say that that ending was the reason why I didn't like it on my first watch. And while I really like it now, I still feel like that's my biggest criticism of this movie. Just in that if you don't want to delve into the symbolism and just watch this movie on surface level, the ending just doesn't really make sense. Which again is partly one of the reasons why I had to watch this movie several times to end up really liking it. It's just one of those endings where you just have to like really sit with it, think about it, maybe look up some ending explained videos and just try to really understand it. And don't get me wrong, I think a horror movie with symbolism is great. I just think that if you watch it on a surface level, the movie should also work. So quick example, the movie Get Out has a lot of symbolism and messaging in the story, but if you were to just strip the movie completely of all of its symbolism and messaging, it would still be a really great horror movie. And I feel like that applies to the Babadook all the way until the ending. And then, at least from my experience, the movie loses the surface level viewer. And if you don't want to look too deep into the meaning of things, you kind of just don't get the ending, you know? I don't know, I just think that was a longer way of me saying that I wish that the ending was a bit clear, that's all. Alright, those are my thoughts on the Babadook. Like I said, I absolutely loved Essie and Noah as Amelia and Samuel. I absolutely loved the look of the pop-up book and all of the illustrations. I absolutely adored the overall creature design of the Babadook. I loved the cinematography, score, and all of the sound effects. Plus, those last 30 minutes were absolutely insane. It's just such a creepy, unsettling experience and one of my favorite psychological horror movies. So what did you think about it? Do you have a favorite character or a favorite scene? Also, what's your favorite psychological horror movie? Let me know in the comments. Also, this is just a reminder that I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd, so if you're interested in following me on those and you haven't already, the links are in my description box below. And as always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so Black Phillip knows you'd like to live deliciously. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you again very soon in the next video. Bye!